Welcome to Strip Cover Lit, where we squeeze the bigger picture out of literature. I'm Adrian Fort, and we're here to discuss Chapter 4 of Fairy Tale by Stephen King. We've got comments, reaction, we have a So What Happened section where we recap what went on, then we have Lit Crit before getting to writer's notes on the chapter. But look, if you're trying to help me out here on the channel, if you appreciate what I do here, it really does the trick if you decide to hit that like button at some point in time. If you were here by chance but not design, consider hitting that subscribe button, because all I do on this channel is talk about literature. Mondays and Wednesdays we're going over Fairy Tale, chapter by chapter, and on Fridays we rotate between a short story, a poem, an opening paragraph, and a writer's quote. So let's get into things. We have comments from last section also. If you want to hear me talk about movies or philosophy, things like that, just general YouTubery, in the description below there will be a link to my personal channel. Head on over there, and if you want to subscribe there as well, that would be kind of cool. I'm going through the Daily Stoic. If I ever get back to that series, I promise I will. I've just got to get around to it. Chapter 4 here, we have a comment from last week's video from Angelica saying, we're back to God references, but I'm wondering what it really is. This is sort of a conundrum. Are you crooked? You looking at me crooked? This really is sort of a conundrum. It is sort of a strange feeling here to not really trust the author. Not really trust the author despite the fact that we're coming through a first person. And I don't really trust the author because Stephen King seems to be sort of maybe agnostic. He seems to maybe believe there is some type of higher power, and that's just from, and look, it does not mean that a writer can't write from the place of a religious person. Being an atheist or an agnostic doesn't mean that a theist can't write from the place of a atheist or agnostic. Do it the other way around, right? It doesn't mean you can't, but you have to be very careful to do it truthfully. The truth of the character, right? So there is, and I've watched a lot of atheist-theist debates, and one of the things that often comes up, you get these Ken Ham type characters who come up and think that for some reason atheists are just evil. They want to hate God. They want to not believe in God in order to be evil and wicked. And that's not at all the claim there. The claim from the, sure, I'm sure those people exist, but the claim from the atheist perspective is, I don't know, prove it, bro. The claim from the atheist perspective is, I live in the state of Missouri. Missouri is the show me state. You have got to show me, right? That's all the claim really is. It is not saying, well, if I don't believe God, it's like burying my head in the sand and I think I'm going to get away with it. But it really is a strange feeling here, because even this protagonist seems to have a grip on the periphery of what religion means. And hey, that's a real perspective, right? I never went to church, but when I was a believer, it was sort of a grip on the periphery of what the religion meant, what the religion was. And I think perhaps I'm getting lost, and I think perhaps some readers are getting lost with me in this. Getting lost involving the author in the text. The author's not in the text. This isn't Stephen King's book at this point. It's published, it's out there, we're reading it, it belongs to us. But one of the things that convinces me maybe this is a little bit more authentic a voice than I am willing to grant is this promise. Charlie gives God this promise, which, if you pay attention to deeply religious people, oftentimes for deeply religious people, that promise to God is not communicated in quite this way. It is communicated in more of revelatory terms, if I can be so brass as to conject. It is communicated in the fact that I woke up, I heard the voice of God, and now I know this is what I have to do. Whereas if you take people who are not necessarily weekly churchgoers, let alone daily churchgoers, none of that thing, not these people who have their scripture with them on the day-by-day basis, they read a verse every day, not one of those people. They make promises and wagers with God, which is sort of why the deeply religious don't understand a lot of times. I'm not saying the deeply religious don't understand, but a lot of times you'll get this argument from deeply religious people, hey, why not just believe in God? That way, if you die and you get there and he's there, you're not out of luck. That's called Pascal's wager. So in the same way that people who are religious don't understand the atheistic type of claim, oftentimes, neither then do people on the periphery of religion understand the revelatory terms and try to use wagers with God. I promise, if Dad gets through this, says Charlie, you let me know what it is you need me to do. Just give me the sign, baby, and it's done. But is that the way that it works, right? Is that how cosmic level architecture works? You make a promise and a bargain and a wager with God. From Paul, we get this. Personally, I think Stephen King practices a far more difficult style of narration than any author before him. I'm not ready to make that claim. I think that this was in reference to me saying last video how I thought that the timeline in this book is really, really muddied for me. It is difficult for me to understand where we are time-wise. I'm just going to ruin everything, I think. Why aren't you straight? That's fine. Time-wise here's difficult for me because I keep getting little hints from Stephen King about where we are decade-wise, and there seems to be anachronistic claims, at least to me. I'm lost. I'm lost time-wise. I don't know what decade even we're in. But I'm not willing to go this far to say that Stephen King has a far more difficult narration than any writer before him. William Faulkner is brutal. William Faulkner is absolutely brutal, and I'm just going off the top of my head. So in As I Lay Dying, for example, there is a scene where Darrell is talking to Cash. They are two sons of what is arguably the main character being a deceased woman. These are her two sons. And they're trying to get her body across a river. Now, Cash is the industrious one in the family. He's the one who's able to make things. He made the casket in which they're transporting Eddie. And Darrell, the brother Darrell, is what used to be known as touched by God, right? You've heard that. Maybe you haven't. This is sort of, I'm old now. I just had a birthday and I'm old. But there used to be an expression, and it was more of a, when I was growing up, we knew it more as a Southern expression called touched by God. And when someone was real weird, you might say they were touched by God. Now, when you get really into the nuance of it, I think a lot of the people who used to be known as touched by God were autistic, but they didn't have the word for it. Just by the way that touched by God used to be expressed. Darrell is sort of touched by God, and he's sort of a seer, right? So as they're crossing this river, they're having a conversation, and This is how difficult the narration is with Faulkner. They're having this back and forth in narration, and all of a sudden, there's a question from Darrell, and Cash responds to it. And we just go back to the narration. But if you pay close attention, that question from Darrell does not have quotation marks around it. Darrell thought that to Cash, and Cash audibly responded. I mean, the difficulty of William Faulkner is something that I am not willing to concede. William Faulkner is and I'm not the best read individual on the planet. I'm sure there are people much more difficult to read than that. James Joyce in the novel form is, if you have not read the James Joyce that you're reading in his novels, you're toast. You're toast. William Faulkner, you're toast 2 or 3 times in. So those are Stephen King. Yeah, I want to address this though. Stephen King, in his narration, it seems to me, sort of narrates the way that an old school quarterback played football. He just goes by the gut instinct, and he doesn't care about you. If you're there, man. But if you don't run that post route, by God, he's throwing the ball anyway. So you'd better be there to catch it. That's how sort of Stephen King feels to me. So what happened in this chapter? Charlie goes to see Radar the very next morning, and she does her business and gets a little bit of playtime in. And then Charlie snoops a little bit more. He goes into play with the television. Then Charlie heads his way to the hospital where Bowditch is pretty doped up. I can't read my own handwriting here. He's got rods through his leg. That's what it is. Rods. Rods through the leg and a lot of whatnot going on. While high on painkillers, the old man agrees to let Charlie cut the grass. Which we're back. So Angelica also mentioned that what is the fascination with the house? Why does he want to fix everything up all of a sudden? And it's weird. And we get a little bit of a softening of Bowditch in this scene where he is super high and he tells Charlie that he's the best thing that ever happened to him. We get a little bit of a sense there. So there's Charlie and Bowditch are set up as opposites. But are they set up as opposites so that Charlie does not grow into being Bowditch? Is that one of the underlying things here? One of these cautionary tales. Hey, bud, don't be like me. Do as I say, not as I do. Then, after agreeing to let Charlie cut the grass, he agrees to let Charlie take a picture with Radar for the newspaper. When he goes home, Andy, his old friend Andy, stops by, the one that almost got bit by Radar back in the day, and he tries to get Charlie to play baseball again. He even says that Coach said that he doesn't have to apologize, and he said there's nothing to apologize for, all this stuff. Just drama. The reporter then shows up to take Charlie's picture, and Charlie is surprised at how young he looks. He is, and this is sort of ironic for one of the points I'm going to make in the lit crit portion of this video. Age-wise, he's between Charlie and Bowditch. Charlie makes the observation that he looks like he maybe just got out of college a year ago, something like that. But when you're in high school, a guy that just got out of college, I mean, that could be a lifetime away, right? Charlie starts taking Radar on walks, which the only reason I mention that is that I imagine it's going to play into something later. Because there is so much hullabaloo in the chapter about it. Then Charlie mows the grass with a scythe. I don't mean like Darth Maul. I mean the old I am death, I have a scythe. The picture with Radar goes viral. before viral was a thing. The picture, I think, he mentions YouTube in here. I don't know when this is. I don't know what year we're talking about. But the picture goes into all sorts of newspapers, including the Chicago Tribune. So let's get into the lit crit part. The first thing I want to talk about happens in this very first paragraph here. I mentioned a little bit about how this feels a little bit like Stephen King grabbing the money bag, or attempting to grab the money bag that was Harry Potter. This chapter, when I showed up the next morning at number 1 Sycamore Street, I don't know anyone in the United States of America that refers to a house number in that way. I don't know anyone that refers to anything in that type of fashion. That sounds very much like number 4 Privet Drive, does it not? That does not sound American. It certainly doesn't sound Midwestern. We don't. Maybe they say something like this in the Northeast, where Stephen King is kept up, where they lock him in and don't let him go other places in the country. But I don't know anyone that refers to their address as number 1 Sycamore Street. Ever. Number 1 Sycamore Street. But the next page, I handed her the monkey. Do you mind holding that in your mouth? It's pretty cute, he says to her as he's trying to take a picture of Radar in order to show to Bowditch. Radar was happy to oblige. I'm telling you, that dog knows, man. That dog knows, man. You don't just go talking about a dog that way, okay? On 53, the kissing page to this, Charlie has showed up to talk to Bowditch, and before he gets into the room, he has to fill out some paperwork. And in the midst of this conversation, it comes up, he signed a DNR before he went up for surgery. A form like this is just what he needs to bring if you need to bring him something. Charlie asks, what's a DNR? And the nurse responds, she told me. It was nothing I really wanted to hear. She never answered my question about relatives because she probably didn't know. Why would she? I filled out the form with my address, email address, and cell phone number. I went upstairs thinking there was a double shitload of things to know about, yada, yada, yada. DNR means do not resuscitate. So what we have here with Bowditch is a guy who's ready to go. DNR is do not resuscitate, meaning if I die on that operating table, make no attempt to bring me back. Now, why put this in here? If you are in the camp of literary fiction, which I think Stephen King borderlines, literary fiction, genre fiction, with his better attempts, and I have not read any reviews, but people are saying this is the best Stephen King that's come out in a long time. I haven't seen that yet, but maybe we'll get there. If this is just a character moment, it tells us a lot about Bowditch. It tells us he doesn't want to be brought back. It tells us maybe he's lost everything he's ever had. It tells us even his love for Radar doesn't make him want to stick around. However, if you're looking at this from a genre point of view, and this is called fairy tale, well, what if he knows what's on that other side? What if he knows what's on that other side? What if he knows what's on that other side is what he wants? If, for example, there was a wife on that other side that had already died, he's going to see her. He gets to see her now. He gets to be with her. What if, in the way that we sort of got in The Shining, he goes to the other side just for a moment and is brought back. But when you're brought back, anything that had its hands on you in that other side might come back with you. What if it's something like that? So there are little bits there that could be Not necessarily explained away, but definitely could be interesting from both sides of that coin. Are we in something closer to literary fiction? Or are we in something closer to genre fiction? But the next thing I want to talk about is we get his name. Howard Adrian Bowditch. Now, Adrian, very handsome name. Very handsome name. Also, when I was a child, I lived on Sycamore Street. Wasn't number 1 Sycamore Street, but it was Sycamore. Kind of weird for me. If you're in there, Stephen, get out of my head. And Howard Adrian Bowditch. Howard is a Germanic name from Hugehart. That's not Germanic. Well, that's maybe older Germanic. But it means strong heart or very brave. Strong heart or very brave. Okay. Howard, strong heart, very brave. Maybe at one point in time. Adrian. Adrian, apparently in the Greek, means rich. Apparently in the Latin means dark one. But oftentimes, where we get the name Adrian is from where we currently commonly get the name Adrian is in relation to it means of the Adriatic Sea. The Adriatic Sea, named for Hadrian, I think the same Hadrian that built Hadrian's Wall. So, strong, brave one that is now walled off. Bowditch, often is in reference to Nathaniel Bowditch. I couldn't find any real explanation of what Bowditch, the name, meant, but Nathaniel Bowditch was a mathematician and astronomer, and his name, since his death, has become, well, maybe not since his death, I guess since he was midlife, if I'm remembering those dates correctly, was synonymous with a navigation handbook. So, you have 3 names here that have pretty good meaning in fairy tale lore. Maybe not lore, but fairy tale fashion. Very strong, brave one. The dark one, who builds walls. You know, we've got all these sort of synonymous, all these meanings synonymous with Adrian. And then Bowditch, meaning the astronomer, the navigator, you know, something like that. So we haven't gotten into names yet, so I figured I would drop that one since we get the full name here, just sort of an exploration into what that name means. Also, Hab, H-A-B, are his initials. Don't know if there's anything to be made of that. 57. Oh, yeah. So here's one thing I want to talk about. I'm not going to go bro science on you. I promise. I'm not going bro science. No bro science here, bro. But I have to mention the alpha, and I have to mention the beta, and I have to mention the sigma. Okay. But I'm not going to do it like you often hear it, right? I'm not going to say alpha male, you know, all that stuff. But alpha type personalities, type A people, right? We are getting Charlie set up as an alpha type individual. He's just good at stuff, man. And he's really strong, and he's really fast, and he knows how to call 911, and he's a leader, and he's good at sports, he's handsome, all these things, right? We have him set up as the alpha type individual. And I like to use alpha type personality. I'm not going to go the whole bro science alpha male type, but he's an alpha type personality. But we get this quote here from Bowditch. God damn, I hate being dependent. We get that on page 57. Now, that is a very, very Sigma type quote. So, What's an alpha versus a sigma? The easiest way to look at it is sort of, I think, in pop culture terms. You know the Avengers. Captain America, very alpha. I am the leader. This is how things are done. This is what the rules mean. This is how we're going to fight. Then you have, so that's the alpha type personality. Then you have the sigma type personality, which is Iron Man. Iron Man says, hey, there's a mission to do. There's something that's got to be done. Don't hug me. Don't make too much eye contact. We don't have to follow rules. We've just got to get the stuff done, right? Also, I'm pretty cool, so I need my alone time. Okay, so that's the Avengers. What about the X-Men? Cyclops is the alpha. This is what we're doing. This is the mission. These are the rules. This is how we're doing it. Wolverine is the sigma type personality there. Yeah, I'll come in and I'll wreck shop. You need that done. That stuff needs to happen, but don't talk to me afterwards, okay? There will be no cuddling, okay? That's the sigma type. There. Alpha, Cyclops, Sigma, Wolverine. What about DC Comics? Alpha, Superman. Truth, justice, and the American way. Right? We're leaders. We're doing all the good stuff. We're going to finish the bad guy, and we're going to be home in time to get dinner while it's still warm. The Sigma is Batman. Batman wants you to be afraid of him. That's Batman's main tool. You're going to be afraid of me, and I'm going to be smarter than you. Those two things combined are going to allow me to beat the ever-loving hell out of you. Because it's kind of fun to me. Right? And I'm going to be lost in my work. Wolverine gets lost in the woods. Iron Man, workaholic. The alphas, this is when we start, this is when we stop. That's what the workday is, that's what the rules imply. Give me my credit. Sigma, this is what has to happen. This is how I'm going to break some rules and probably hurt some people, but it's going to be done, and leave me alone afterwards. The reason these two often work together. Why are Wolverine stories better when Cyclops is along? Why is Iron Man more interesting when you have Captain America to bounce him off of? Why is the Justice League so compelling when you have the ultimate superhero, indefatigable, indomitable Superman, but Batman could kick his butt? You know, Batman wins because he's Batman. Why does that work so well? Because no matter who we are and no matter what our natural instincts are, no matter which one of these personalities we kind of skew towards, the alpha type personality or the sigma type personality, both of them exist in us. And there are moments in every day when either one of these is more compelling to us. So for example, you often have the sigma type personalities who are not leaders, who don't want you to be around, but they often have more vulnerable sidekicks, right? Wolverine, Jubilee. Iron Man, okay, maybe Iron Man didn't have any, but Batman, Robin, right? You have these, all of the potency of the Sigma gets unraveled in someone for the Sigma to pass the knowledge along to. Almost always. The Iron Man 3 movie had the kid sidekick. They're never like lovey-dovey relationships, but they are always potent with the vulnerable party's potential. That is a leadership quality. These personality types often point out the flaws with one another. This is not like the beta type personality and the alpha type personality. The beta type personalities to the alpha type personalities in these stories, in X-Men, think Cyclops telling Colossus what to do. Think of Superman telling Cyborg what to do. Think of Captain America giving Hawkeye orders. These are subordinates. The Sigma won't have it. Okay, Cyclops is more than willing, is more than capable of giving Wolverine orders, and Wolverine will just do things his own way anyway, right? But if you have that less dominant individual, we can see that the Jubilees of the world, that the Robins of the world, that the any of these supporting characters to the Sigma are budding alpha type personalities. I think what we're setting up here, and what we have to watch as it unfurls, is the Bowditch character setting up to teach Charlie not just something about life, not just something about the fragility of life, but if we're heading into some type of fairy tale domain, probably it's something that with which Bowditch has authority, with which Bowditch has much experience. Bowditch being an ultimate type of Sigma personality. '63 and '64, we get an interesting little scene here. Dad drove me to the hospital and waited downstairs reading reports while I went up to visit Mr. Bowditch. I saw he'd also had a hamburger plus mac and cheese on the table, but he hadn't eaten much of either. Of course, he hadn't spent 2 hours swinging a scythe, or a scythe? Scythe? I say scythe. Deal with it. And although he tried to be pleasant and looked at some new pictures of radar plus one of the Scythe, and another of his half-cut front lawn, it was clear to me he was in a lot of pain. He kept pushing the button that released the dope. The third time he did it, it made a low buzzing sound that like when a contestant on a game show gives the wrong answer. I've maxed out for I'm trying to skip the cursing because of YouTube. Okay, so I've maxed out for an hour. Better go, Charlie, before I start barking at you just because I feel miserable. Come back Friday. No, Saturday. Maybe I'll feel better then. I'm in a lot of pain, and I'm very angry. I'm getting a little out of control, man. You better go before I start barking and maybe howling at the moon. This is something like a werewolf scene, right? You have the scene, all the classic werewolf films, which, by the way, there's not enough. Why aren't there more werewolf movies? Somebody get on that. You have that scene where the person who knows something's happening and they're threatening the other, you gotta go, something's not right. All of a sudden they're a werewolf, you eat the person. I mean, the werewolf eats the person, whatever, you know what I'm saying. Last thing I want to say on a lit crit type domain. So far, this story is so generic. The characters so sort of loosey-goosey. The narration so sort of blah that all I can do is read it and be upset that I'm not reading something that it reminds me of, or that I'm not watching something that it reminds me of. This chapter, I started getting Unbreakable vibes. You know Unbreakable, the movie by M. Night Shyamalan, where David Dunn just sort of realizes he's invincible. That's sort of what I got here. We get this character who is coming of age and just sort of realizing, I'm really good at baseball because I just started playing. And I'm really good at football because I just started playing. And I'm really good at cutting a grass with a scythe because I just picked it up. And I'm really good with this dog because I just petted it. I'm starting to get the David Dunn Unbreakable vibes that he's putting together, that maybe he's not quite the boy next door. But then I got upset that I wasn't watching Unbreakable. Is this story for anyone else becoming completely blah? Let me know in the comments, and if you leave one, maybe I'll read it next time. Because for me, the story is becoming very blah. On to writing. Notes about the writing here. We have back on 51 on that very first page where we are at number 1, Privet Drive. Talking about Radar, she gobbled her breakfast. Dad had brought home a 25-pound sack of her chow, then wanted to play with the monkey. Phrasing. Moving on. 58. We have a description of Bowditch coming to us from Charlie. And it is very odd to me. He had an elegant way of talking, almost like a professor. But I didn't think retired teachers could afford to shop in a market that boasted of having a, quote, step-down wine cellar, end quote. Does Bowditch strike you as particularly elegant? This is sort of in the same way that last chapter we were so many pages in. We got a description of Bowditch on a physical level being a very thin guy. I didn't picture him as a thin guy. I pictured him as that crusty old sort of rotund man who wasn't quite fat, but had something rolling over the old belt buckle. That's how I pictured him. But I was wrong. Here, I'm not wrong. I am not wrong. Read any of the quotes that we get from Bowditch and tell me that they sound, quote unquote, elegant. I don't think you'll find a one. So that is a weird, and so besides that, despite the accuracy here that I'm claiming it's inaccurate, despite that, is that a good description? If we're looking at this from a writer's point of view, is that a good way to describe something? Is that telling or is that showing? Why do we have to be told that if we had been shown it in the dialogue? The second thing I have from that same page of 58, oh yeah, this is bad. This is a bad one. Andy Chin, his friend, comes over. We've talked a little bit about names in this chapter so far. Chin, and so we get later the coach giving him a, I wouldn't call it a racial epithet, because it's not really one that you've ever heard, or not one. Maybe it's an old thing. Maybe it's a Stephen King thing. But he's Chinese. He's Asian at least. Chen is, I think, a Chinese name. Chen. That's a Chinese name. Coach said you could come back and play baseball, Andy said. After checking our fridge for any tasty bites, he settled on some leftover Kung Pao chicken. Really? Steven, really? The Asian guy comes over and just happens upon the Kung Pao chicken? You're better than that. You're better than that. You know, no wonder you're friends with J.K. Rowling. Moving on. Andy then goes on to say He thinks it's a compliment. So the coach starts calling him the Yellow Peril. This is just a real weird little racist part of the book here. Just a whole lot of stuff going on that I don't appreciate. I don't fully understand what's happening. I don't get it, I guess. I'm just going to say I don't get it. He talks about the coach calling him the Yellow Peril, and then says he thinks it's a compliment, which I find hilarious. Besides, 2 more seasons and I'll be out of Hillview and playing for Hofstra. Division 1, here I come. Full ride, baby. Wouldn't Charlie already know this? Like, it's just the fact that Charlie would already know it does not preclude us from getting that in conversation. But it makes it very awkward in his dialogue. And I have to say, maybe I've just never noticed it in Stephen King before. Maybe I've got my nose in the air and I'm being a bit of an literati, right? The dialogue in this book is miserable at times. There's too many inclusions. Too many inclusions in the quotes. People going back on what they've said. Like, it's realistic, but does it have to be realistic to be good? How much verisimilitude, it's a great word, by the way, how much verisimilitude is necessary in a story for it to be good, and how much verisimilitude makes it redundant, right? All of these times people say things like, he could do that, but I mean, who would want to? But if he does, there's all these little inclusionary statements in this book. You should never, ever, ever... Look, I'm not one to say nevers. But cliches suck. On 61, she kept looking at me for reassurance, which touched my heart. Touched my heart. That's stupid. That is terrible. That is a cliche, so why not use cliches? Cliches are a shortcut. I know exactly what it means the minute that Charlie tells us it touched his heart. What you're doing, when you use a cliche on a writerly level, you are ripping the chance for your character you're ripping away the chance for the character to express themselves. So instead of saying, it touched my heart, what little Charlie Reedism could we get in that moment to express? So maybe his mom had a phrase, right? Maybe his mom would say things like, I don't know. I'm kind of putting myself on the spot here. Maybe his mom used to, whenever he would do something precious, say, in my heart, or to my soul, right? He would do something and she'd just go, oh, in my heart, or oh, to my soul. Something that borderlines cliche, but we don't really get that all the time. Oh, of my heart, in my heart, or of my soul. You don't hear that all the time. If that was from his mom, we'll say two in my soul, which is something weird, right? Two in my soul. You and me, right? That's two. Two in my soul. That is her phrase. If you establish that early in the piece, before she goes to get the chicken, Charlie says to her, baby Charlie says, don't, bring me one. And she says, I'll bring you two in my soul. Here, when Radar is looking at him for reassurance, he can just say, two in my soul. What you do there is you build rapport with your reader. You call back to earlier in the book. And by calling back earlier in the book, you're re-emerging that memory of the mother. The mother in this story is everything that's sweet and sacred and lost. So if you have that phrase from the mother and you reinsert it right there with radar, it's sort of like in wrestling. If I'm going to snoot around, I'll throw around wrestling references. Sting was the great alpha of the WCW until he became the Sigma. Huh? How's that? So, say Sting gets in a tag team match against the NWO, against Scott Hall and Kevin Nash, and he chooses as his partner Juventud Guerrera. Now, this makes no sense, but it doesn't have to, because all we're doing is we know Sting is the big good guy, the NWO, they're the big bad guys. The moment Sting picks someone to be his tag team partner, Juventud Guerrera gets all the credibility of Sting. They're buddies. They're tag team partners, baby. Yeah. In this moment, if that phrase, "two in my soul," gets transferred onto radar, Mom and radar are sharing that status. 66. This is when Charlie is talking about his picture being in all the papers. A kid helping out an old guy who fell off a ladder and broke his leg was nothing special, but the picture sold it. Radar was caught mid-lick with me with my arm around her neck and my head thrown back in laughter and looking, dare I say, rather handsome. Which made me wonder if Gina Pasquarelli, my daydream girl, had come across it. That is authentic. That is 17-year-old guy. That is right in that wheelhouse. So for all of the times that we get these things that seem anachronistic, or all of these times that we get Stephen King writing as a teenager, but really what he's doing is writing from the viewpoint of teenage Stephen King, which was the 1940s, and he's been publishing 9 books a year since 1947. Retire, Stephen, so other people can have a chance. What was I saying? I was mad. I got mad for no reason. Look, that's authentic. That's authentic, and it is bringing something up from the past in this book. Gina Pasquarelli was mentioned earlier. We get this authentic little teenager moment, and we hearken back to the girl who was mentioned earlier. This builds camaraderie between our narrator and the reader. That's good writing. And the last note that I have here on 66, talking about a woman, her blonde hair, blond, unless there's new rules about the language, blonde for a female is blonde, right? Am I wrong about that? That's all I've got for this video. I hope to have you in the next video as well. Probably you didn't make it this long, but if you did, congratulations. But there's no way anyone is still here. So, being that you are not still here, the next video for this series will be on Wednesday, when we will go over Chapter 5, and I hope to have you back for that video as well.